I think a lot of the time when we think about women in the workplace, we think about um, the struggles of women in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, particularly white middle class women, to get into the kind of jobs that were held by their male counterparts, by, their husbands, their fathers, their brothers. Um, and we just think to ourselves, oh, they should just let them in, right? We weren't letting them in. Eventually, we let them in and now they do whatever they want. And that's not quite how it works, right? It's not just an issue of enforcing people not to discriminate based on gender in terms of hiring practices, but in the workplace as well. Is your workplace friendly to every kind of person to work there? Um, and so when we think about some of the barriers that face women in the workplace, it's not just an issue of whether they'll hire you or not, or whether they will even pay you equally or not. Although those are two major concerns, there's also other issues of access, right? If, women aren't allowed to leave when they have babies, that can be difficult and it can cause them not to get a job that they otherwise would excel at, right? If a woman is unable to achieve childcare. So this is a big issue that is based on issues of socioeconomic status and class as well, right? Which is why I say it's mainly, white middle class women that were reaping the benefits from this. As we discussed with, the overview of feminism and the fight for the workplace equality, one of the biggest issues we see today is, women trying to lean in and trying to have it all. But really, one of the primary issues that feminists are fighting for is that the workplaces actually should, the structures we have in place to get women into the workforce should be more friendly toward women, especially as long as we are going to still assume that they are meant to be primary caregivers, right? So as long as we still treat women that way, which we largely do, whether we should or not, whether we want to or not, that is how we still see women, is as primarily caregivers, domestic workers, people who can do more of that emotional labor, people who can do more child care. And we really do believe a lot of the times that the primary responsibility for child care in the home belongs to women. And as long as we still keep perpetuating these attitudes, then a lot of the laws and a lot of the workplace policies have to really reflect an accommodation of those attitudes. So, if we're going to require that, women be the primary caregivers, then we have to offer them some kind of child care in order to allow them to be in the workplace. And I think there is an assumption a lot of the time that, women can just opt not to be in the workplace. But as we discussed with neoliberal feminism, that's not an option for every woman. In our current economy, for instance, a lot of women do not have the option to stay at home. They have to work. Minimum wage has not risen with the cost of living in America. And so there are very few jobs that actually pay a really decent living wage that could support an entire family. So, if their husbands aren't, or their partners aren't necessarily making enough money to support an entire family, then they have to go into the workforce. Or in that, we're also not even considering single mothers. We're not considering women that just prefer to be in the workforce. And while that might be an individual issue of, selecting a partner that's willing to split the work of childcare with you, it still is really on the burden of society to think about how we can make that easier for people. How can we make it to where we can divide this more evenly? And so with that comes issues of things like parental leave. Besides, okay, so when women have a baby, they need to leave. A lot of people really do not think about how much work goes into a child for the first year of their lives. And really, it's too much for one person. So there should be leave for both parents, right? There should be family leave. It shouldn't all rest on the woman to take care of that child for that length of time. There are companies that are starting to do better at this, but really, the fact that we don't have any structures in place to protect women from discrimination based on pregnancy, discrimination based off childcare, and those barriers to entering the workforce on a level playing ground with men, the fact that we still don't have those is a problem, especially given that we are one of the richest countries in the world. We should be able to figure this out. And yet we just really haven't made it a priority. And so that's kind of one of the things that feminists have been struggling against for a while, and other groups as well. We've been really trying to think through how can we make this more doable. So one thing I want you to do is I want you to take a look at the article below that kind of outlines, it's really just an introduction to her book, but when she talks about really not just like the major key issues, but like who's been included in those conversations. We often don't consider, barriers based off of, culture, barriers based off of, other marginalized groups. A lot of women aren't just women, right? They're also other things. So we also have to think about that. And if we go back to that idea of, the feminist fight was to get women in the workplace, what really was it? A lot of feminist groups were fighting to just create equity in terms of childcare and access, and a lack of and really enforce rules around discrimination. So really be thinking about, when you're reading through things that have to do with childcare and maternity leave and whatnot, who's benefiting from this, who should be benefiting from this, and how can we really level that playing field is really the issue at stake.